The library on the Air Force Base was not a place of noise or celebration. It was a hushed, steady space, lined with endless shelves of technical manuals, flight histories, maps, and binders stuffed with operational records. It was the kind of room where the fluorescent lights buzzed faintly and the smell of paper mixed with old coffee from the break room next door. To most people stationed there, it was nothing more than a storage unit with chairs, a stopover for finding a training manual or signing out a map before a briefing. But to her, it was a living, breathing organism. She was the librarian. Not an officer, not a pilot, not a decorated soldier. Just the librarian. Her name rarely made it into conversations beyond the predictable. Where's the flight logbook? Or, do you have the new update on F-16 maintenance procedures? Yet despite her invisible role, she was the quiet backbone of the information network. She knew which pilot always returned manuals late. She knew which sergeant skipped reading entire sections of protocol and tried to bluff his way through training. She knew when the base commander pulled out Cold War records, perhaps more often than he should. Her days had a rhythm, one built on small details. Morning began with unlocking the double doors to the archive. She'd flick on the lights, breathe in the papery stillness, and begin her ritual of checking the returns cart. Manuals about engine calibration, updated handbooks on satellite communications, even dusty binders that hadn't been touched in months. All of it passed through her hands. She logged everything, making sure the records matched, making sure no one slipped away with something they shouldn't. Most people didn't notice, but she did. Manuals came back with dog-eared pages. Some returned with highlighted paragraphs or faint smudges of grease from hangar floors. Sometimes, a manual would return weeks later than the sign-out sheet claimed. Each clue told her stories about the men and women on base, stories they'd never realized she'd read through fingerprints and pen marks. Still, it was lonely work. Soldiers strode past her with salutes for higher ranks, with laughter echoing down the hallways, with the kind of camaraderie she never quite entered. To them, she wasn't a part of the mission. She wasn't someone who flew sorties or patched wounded comrades. She was just the quiet woman behind the desk, glasses perched low on her nose, keeping watch over dusty stacks no one cared about. But that invisibility gave her power. No one questioned when she walked into the restricted stacks. No one wondered why she spent hours reorganizing technical archives from decades ago. They assumed she was just meticulous, which she was, but they never saw the way she observed. She noticed when two officers signed out the same manual within hours of each other. She noticed when classified reports were filed under the wrong year, almost as though someone had tried to hide them. Her sharp memory stored everything, and she kept her observations tucked away like bookmarks in the chapters of her mind. The truth was, she loved her work. She loved the neatness of it, the way the chaos of missions and operations reduced itself into tidy rows of binders. She loved the sound of pages snapping against three-ring binders, the clicking of old microfiche machines as she cataloged records from wars she hadn't lived through. Most of all, she loved the silence. In a place where jets thundered and alarms blared during drills, her library was a sanctuary of stillness. Yet, beneath that calm, there was always a current of curiosity. Sometimes she wondered about the files she couldn't touch, the ones with red stripes across their covers. Stamped classified, level 4. She would slide them carefully onto their shelves, never opening them, never asking questions. Still, she couldn't help but wonder what was inside. Were they records of foreign negotiations? Plans for future operations? Or darker things, the kind of missions whispered about but never admitted? She didn't know. And perhaps she didn't want to know. But her nature, meticulous, observant, quietly relentless, made her different from most. While others walked past those binders without a thought, She catalogued them with the same precision she gave to every document. She kept mental notes of which ones appeared suddenly, as if delivered from nowhere, and which ones vanished after weeks of gathering dust. Her evenings were quiet, too. Often, she stayed long after the base library closed. She told herself it was just to keep things in order, reorganize the outdated files, or cross-check digital indexes against paper records. But truthfully, she stayed because she liked the solitude. The hum of the overhead lights, the steady beat of her own footsteps across the concrete floor. It was comforting, predictable. And maybe, though she wouldn't admit it, she liked being surrounded by secrets. Because that's what the library really was. A vault of secrets dressed up as a filing system. Every manual, every record, every file represented knowledge someone had decided should not reach the outside world. To civilians, it was all invisible. To the soldiers, it was just another tool for the mission. But to her, the librarian, it was a story. The story of her country told not in speeches or news broadcasts, but in binders and technical diagrams. In the quiet moments, she sometimes imagined herself as a keeper of those stories, like a bridge between what was known and what was hidden. Yet she also knew her role was never meant to be glamorous. She wasn't a hero. She wasn't a spy. She was simply the custodian of knowledge others didn't have the patience to maintain. That night, the night it all began, felt no different at first. She stayed late, as usual, surrounded by neat stacks of documents. She moved methodically, checking titles against her lists, muttering to herself when she spotted a misfiled index. Her hands moved with practiced precision, sliding binders into place, dusting shelves as she went. Nothing unusual. Nothing remarkable. Outside, the base was winding down. Pilots finished their debriefings. Mechanics cleaned grease from their hands. The cafeteria closed its doors. The hum of activity softened into the quieter rhythm of night. In the library, only her lamp cast a warm glow across the desk. She was alone, or at least she thought she was. When she picked up the next binder, a routine technical report, nothing special, she realized it belonged in a section she rarely entered, the restricted wing. She sighed, tucked it under her arm, and walked toward the heavy steel door. Normally, she left those for the next day, but tonight, with no one watching, she decided to finish the job. She slid her keycard through the reader, expecting the red light of denial. She knew her clearance wasn't meant for that door, but instead, the reader blinked green. She froze. A door gave a mechanical click. Then, slowly, it opened. For the first time in all her years on the base, she realized her quiet, ordinary job had just shifted. She wasn't just the librarian anymore. She had just crossed the threshold into something far more dangerous, and far more important. The green light blinked at her like an accusation. She had expected the usual denial, the red flash, the shrill buzz that told her she had no clearance. That was the routine. That was safety. Instead, the card reader's light pulsed green, and the heavy lock inside the steel door clicked open with a sound that seemed far too loud in the quiet corridor. Her heart stuttered. She stepped back, staring at the door. She almost laughed, convinced she had swiped wrong. She pulled her keycard out, inspected the faded laminate photo, her unsmiling face staring back, and tried again. Swipe. Green light. Click. It wasn't a mistake. The door creaked slightly ajar, just enough to whisper that it wanted to be opened. Beyond it lay a hallway few on base ever saw. At least, not people like her. That wing was marked clearly on base maps, but always blurred in conversation. People referred to it in vague phrases, the vault section, or down past records. Her fingers tightened on the binder, pressed against her chest. A part of her, the rule follower, the meticulous keeper of order, screamed that she should walk away immediately. Close the door. File the binder tomorrow. Forget it happened. But another part, the one that thrived on quiet observations and patterns others missed, whispered something else. This is your chance. You may never see it again. She hesitated, torn between training and curiosity. The hall around her was silent. The security cameras mounted above the doors blinked their tiny red lights, recording every angle, but no alarm blared. No armed guards rushed forward. No stern voice came over the intercom. It was just her and the green light. She exhaled slowly and pressed her palm against the cold steel, pushing the door open. The hinges groaned softly, and a stale draft of air swept out. It smelled faintly metallic, like dust mixed with oil. The kind of smell that belonged to rooms sealed for too long. She slipped inside. The door closed behind her with a dull thud, and for the first time, she realized she was in. Actually in. The floor beneath her boots was smooth concrete, the walls lined with panels and security locks. Ahead stretched a dim hallway, lit by motion-triggered lights that flickered awake as she walked. At the end of the hall, another door awaited, larger, heavier, with a thick plate of steel embedded across it. She scanned the panel. Another card reader. She lifted her badge hesitantly, certain this was where the system would finally reject her. But when she swiped, again, the light blinked green. Her stomach dropped. 2 levels of access. That wasn't just a glitch. That meant someone, somewhere, had programmed her card to open this. Whether by mistake or by design, she didn't know. But it was no accident. She thought about turning back, her chest tight with the weight of the decision. Every rational fiber told her this was dangerous. People didn't just stumble into the special operations vault. There were consequences for even being near the door. If she was caught, it wouldn't be a slap on the wrist. It could mean interrogation, reassignment, or worse, the end of her career. But curiosity pulled her forward like gravity. The door opened with a hiss of pressurized air. Cold air spilled. Out, brushing her cheeks, carrying that same metallic scent. She stepped into the chamber and froze. It was nothing like the library she knew. Instead of neat rows of shelves and orderly binders, the room was a maze of towering file cabinets, locked crates, and sealed steel containers stamped with codes she didn't recognize. Some bore stenciled warnings in bold black letters, restricted a CCESS level 5. Others were marked simply with symbols, triangles, circles, cryptic alphanumeric codes. The lighting was dim, strips of fluorescent bulbs buzzing faintly above. Dust motes swirled in the stale air, but the space didn't feel abandoned. The hum of machinery vibrated through the walls, faint but steady. Somewhere in here, something was still alive. She tightened her grip on the binder. All she had meant to do was shelve it in its proper place. Now, she was standing in a room designed for secrets. On instinct, she walked carefully along the rows, her eyes scanning the labels. She saw file drawers marked with years, some dating back to the Cold War, others as recent as last year. The lettering was all official, but the phrasing made her pause. Unacknowledged missions. Denied operations field activity. Not recorded. She bit her lip, a chill crawling up her spine. She wasn't supposed to see any of this. Still, she couldn't stop looking. She brushed her fingertips over a crate, feeling the cold steel beneath her skin. She imagined what might be inside. Documents, weapons, devices, never meant to see the light of day. Her librarian's instinct wanted to catalog it all, to make sense of the disorder, to bring order to this secret chaos. Her eyes landed on a folder left out on a central table. Not locked away, not hidden, just sitting there, waiting. Her breath caught. The folder was stamped with the words Operation Sable Wind. She'd never heard the phrase before, but the date. Printed in the corner was recent, only 3 months old. Carefully, she reached out and touched the folder, her hands trembling. She told herself she would only glance, just enough to satisfy her curiosity, then close it and leave. The first page made her blood run cold. It was a mission summary. Location: foreign soil. Objective: asset retrieval. Casualties: undisclosed. Every line was clipped, clinical, stripped of detail, but it was enough to tell her this wasn't training. This was active, current, and buried in the lines was a name, one she recognized from the base. A pilot who had gone missing 2 months ago. Her knees weakened. They had told everyone his jet malfunctioned during a routine drill. That was the story. But here, in black ink, was proof of something else. He hadn't been lost in an accident. He had been lost in a mission no one was supposed to know existed. The air felt heavier. Her ears rang as though the walls themselves pressed in on her. She snapped the folder shut, her chest rising and falling in shallow breaths. This wasn't just history buried in old binders. This was happening now. And somehow, she had been allowed inside. The sound of her own breathing filled the room. Then she heard it, the faintest click, the kind that came from a security camera adjusting its lens. She froze, her skin prickling. Someone was watching. She forced her shaking hands to put the binder she had been carrying on the nearest table. She adjusted it as though she had done nothing unusual, nothing worth noting. Just a librarian, lost in the stacks. But deep down, she knew she had crossed the line. The door had opened for her, yes. But that didn't mean she belonged here. And whoever was watching through those cameras, they would be asking questions now. Questions she wasn't ready to answer. She turned and left quickly, her footsteps echoing across the concrete floor. The door hissed shut behind her, sealing the vault once more. Back in the quiet hallway, the world looked the same as it always had. But she knew it wasn't. Nothing would ever be the same again. She glanced down at her badge, at the innocent piece of plastic that had opened doors it never should have. A librarian's badge, meant for books and manuals, had just unlocked the Special Operations Vault. And whether it was accident, error, or intention, she understood one thing with certainty. Someone would come looking for her. The door sealed shut behind her, locking the air of the vault away as if it had swallowed her secret hole. She leaned against the wall in the corridor, trying to slow her breathing. Her hands trembled, not from the binder she had carried, but from the weight of what she had just seen. She had been inside the Special Operations Vault. She had touched files stamped unacknowledged. She had seen the name of a man she had spoken to in the mess hall only months before. And now she couldn't unknow it. But the strangest thing wasn't the files. It was the vault itself. For all its warnings and steel doors, it had not felt like a room in constant use. Dust lay across the shelves in uneven layers. Some crates were so old their stenciled paint had faded. Drawers groaned as though they hadn't been opened in years. Yet the folder she'd found, the one marked Operation Sable, Wind, was recent, active, current. That contrast gnawed at her. This wasn't just a storage archive. It was something else, part mausoleum, part heartbeat. A forgotten room, and yet not forgotten at all. When she finally returned to her quarters that night, she found it impossible to sleep. Her eyes stayed open, tracing shadows across the ceiling. She kept hearing the hiss of the vault's doors, the mechanical click of cameras adjusting, the thud of her own heart pounding against her ribs. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw that pilot's name written in black ink. Every time she told herself to forget, her memory fought back with sharper clarity. The librarian in her, the woman who lived to put chaos into order, could not let go. By morning, she had convinced herself of one thing. If the vault had opened once, it would open again. And if it opened again, then maybe she was meant to see what was inside. The thought scared her. It also exhilarated her. That evening, after the rush of the day faded and the base grew quiet again, she found herself walking the same corridor. Her steps echoed, louder than she wanted. She paused before the steel door, heart hammering, and slid her badge across the reader. Green light. Click. The vault welcomed her back without hesitation. This time, she didn't hesitate. She walked directly into the heart of the chamber, her eyes sharper now, her fear dulled by the pull of obsession. She examined the crates more carefully. Some bore strange emblems, not military insignia, but geometric designs she didn't recognize. Circles intersecting triangles, spirals, foreign lettering. Others were sealed with old-style locks, as though no one had updated them for decades. Her hand hovered over one crate with a broken latch. The wood was splintered at the edge, and she pulled it open just enough to see inside. Stacks of photographs filled the box, bundled with rubber bands. She slid one out. The photograph was black and white, grainy, but sharp enough to make her stomach clench. It showed men in desert fatigues standing beside a wreckage, not of a plane, but of something unrecognizable. The shape was jagged, metallic, but not like any aircraft she knew. Across the back, written in fading pen, was a date from the 1970s. She shoved the photograph back, her pulse quickening. The vault wasn't just a record of operations. It was a graveyard of things never spoken aloud. Moving deeper, she passed file cabinets labeled with names of regions: Andes, Sahara, Arctic, Indian Ocean. Each drawer held mission summaries, coded reports, hand-drawn maps. She read phrases that made her skin prickle: non-standard craft retrieval, unacknowledged civilian casualties, containment successful, but not confirmed. Her rational mind screamed to stop, to put the files back, to leave. But the more she saw, the more she wanted to understand. This was history that didn't exist anywhere else. This was the second layer of America's story, the one carved out of secrecy, silence, and shadows. She came upon a shelf stacked with reels of microfilm, each labeled only with a year. Her fingers brushed over the years like stepping stones through time. 1962, 1979, 1991. She selected one at random, 2003, and held it up. Without a reader, it was just a strip of darkness. But she knew what it represented. Hidden records. Invisible truths. As she turned to place it back, she noticed something that hadn't been there the night before. A binder sat on the central table. Neat, fresh, waiting. Her throat tightened. The folder was marked with today's date. She hadn't left it there. She hadn't touched that table. Someone had placed it after her first visit, either to test her or to guide her. Her hands shook as she opened it. Inside were documents typed in cold, efficient language. Unacknowledged overflight, coastal region. Subject, foreign surveillance. Status, ongoing. Attached were satellite photographs, blurry but unmistakable. Ships in formation, planes in flight. None of it matched anything she had ever heard about in the news or official reports. At the bottom of the folder, a slip of paper caught her eye. Not typed, handwritten. It contained only 5 words. You're not supposed to stop. She dropped it as though it had burned her. Her heart hammered as she scanned the walls for cameras. She knew she wasn't alone. Someone had left this for her. Someone knew she'd come back. And worse, they wanted her to continue. She staggered back from the table, pressing the binder shut. Questions swirled through her mind faster than she could process. Was she being tested? Recruited? Trapped? The vault was no longer just a forgotten room. It was alive, aware, a stage where she had been placed as an unwilling actor. And whether she liked it or not, someone else was writing her part. She hurried out, clutching her badge tight in her hand, and forced herself not to run down the hall. By the time she reached the main stacks of the library, her legs felt weak. The familiar rows of books and manuals looked different now. Safer, yes, but somehow smaller, more meaningless. She sank into her chair, staring at the keys of her typewriter without moving. For the first time since taking the job, the library felt less like a sanctuary and more like a cage. Because now she understood. The vault was not forgotten. It was waiting. And she had just answered its call. The vault haunted her. She tried to convince herself that life could return to normal, that she could sit behind her library desk, file manuals, and smile politely when soldiers stopped by. But normal had been shattered the moment her badge blinked green. Every binder she touched in the ordinary stacks now seemed trivial. Every manual she logged felt hollow compared to the folders in that hidden room. And it wasn't just the content she couldn't shake. It was the note. "You're not supposed to stop." Those 5 words played over and over in her head. Someone had seen her. Someone knew she was inside the vault, had anticipated she would come back, and had left that message deliberately. But who? And why? If it was a trap, why not close it on her immediately? If it was a test, what did they want her to prove? She couldn't tell, and the uncertainty gnawed at her. For 3 nights, she avoided the vault. She told herself she would never return. She busied herself with cataloging outdated training modules, forcing herself to smile at passing officers. Yet her nights were sleepless. She'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of those dusty crates pressing down on her chest. The librarian in her wanted to organize it, catalog it, tame it. The human in her wanted to run far away. But she couldn't run. Even if she kept her silence, the knowledge was inside her now. She knew pilots had died in missions never acknowledged. She knew there were photographs of wreckage no report had mentioned. She knew there was a second story of her country, a shadow history folded into steel drawers. And she knew, without question, that her badge would still open that door. Silence, then, became its own kind of burden. By the end of the week, she began noticing things. At first, she dismissed them as paranoia. A sergeant lingering too long at the reference desk, pretending to leaf through an atlas. A junior officer who asked her what time she usually left work, as if it were casual small talk. A security inspection of her office that she had not requested. She told herself it was coincidence, until she found her desk drawer slightly ajar one morning. She always locked it. Always. Yet the papers inside had shifted, the neat stack now uneven. Someone had been in her things. Her throat tightened. That day, she fumbled with her work. Pages slipped from her fingers. Binders fell from her grip. She caught herself staring at the door every time someone walked past. The whispers of shadows she'd read in the vault now seemed to follow her into daylight. The decision loomed heavier with each hour. Report it or keep quiet. If she reported, she could walk into the commanding officer's office, confess the mistake, and explain the badge error. It was the responsible thing, the loyal thing. She could say she had seen nothing, just a door that opened, a room she did not enter. Perhaps they'd believe her. Perhaps they'd fix the system and send her back to her quiet stacks. But deep down, she knew it wouldn't be that simple. The vault wasn't just an accident waiting to be reported. It was designed to be hidden. By stepping inside, she had already crossed an invisible boundary. If she confessed, they would never trust her again. And worse, she might never leave that office. On the other hand, if she stayed silent, she was complicit. She would carry the knowledge of dead men and secret missions without speaking a word. She would smile across the cafeteria table at officers who had no idea what she'd seen. She would nod politely at generals whose hands had signed those files. Silence might keep her safe, but it would also keep her prisoner. That night, she sat at her kitchen table long after midnight, a mug of untouched coffee cooling beside her. She laid her badge on the table and stared at it as though it might answer. The plastic looked so harmless, faded, scratched from years of swiping through doors. But it was more powerful than any book in her library. With this, she could walk into a room not meant for her. With this, she could peer into America's hidden chapters. And with this, she could damn herself. Her fingers traced the edges of the badge as her mind turned in circles. Report or silence? Silence or report? Neither felt right. Neither felt survivable. Her thoughts broke when she heard a knock at the door. It was soft, measured. Not the hurried knock of a friend or the angry pounding of someone impatient. It was the knock of someone who knew she was inside and was willing to wait. Her chest tightened. She rose slowly, her bare feet cold against the floor, and crept to the peephole. A man in uniform stood outside. Not one she recognized. His posture was straight, his hands clasped behind his back, his expression unreadable. She froze. The knock came again, 3 calm raps. Then silence. Her heart pounded. She stayed pressed against the door, not daring to breathe. After a long moment, the man glanced once at his watch, then turned and walked down the hall. She waited until his footsteps disappeared before collapsing against the door, her breath shaky. It was no longer a question of paranoia. They knew. The next day at work, she tried to keep her routine steady. She cataloged books, signed off training manuals, greeted soldiers with her usual polite nods. But her hands trembled on the paper forms. She could feel the weight of eyes on her back, whether real or imagined. Every time the door creaked open, she expected the man in uniform to step inside. She was no longer invisible, and invisibility had been her shield. That night, she sat once more at her table, badge between her fingers, staring at the walls of her apartment. The silence was thick, almost suffocating. She realized the vault was no longer just a room. It had seeped into her life, leading into every corner. She carried its dust on her skin, its shadows in her mind. Silence wasn't just an option anymore. It was a battle. Her instincts screamed at her to hide, to bury what she had seen, to retreat into the safety of anonymity. But her conscience whispered louder. Knowledge demands responsibility. If you do nothing, you're just as guilty as the ones who wrote those reports. She pressed her palms against her face, caught between the librarian's instinct for order and the human instinct for survival. She was just one woman, just a librarian. She had no power against the machinery of operations and shadows. Yet the vault had chosen her, whether by accident or design. And somewhere deep inside, she knew, silence could protect her for a time. But duty, the duty to truth, to history, to the men whose names were locked away, was beginning to demand its price. The next evening, she returned to the vault. She told herself she wouldn't. She told herself the knock at her door, the man in uniform, the subtle inspections were enough reason to never swipe her badge again. But curiosity, mixed with a strange compulsion, pulled her back. It was no longer about mistake or chance. It was about something deeper. She had seen too much to stop halfway. When the lock beeped green and the heavy door slid open, the air inside hit her like a frozen breath. The room smelled of dust, steel, and forgotten paper. The light flickered overhead as though the vault itself disapproved of her presence. She stepped inside and shut the door behind her, sealing herself once more in the silence of secrets. Her hands shook as she opened the first drawer. The folder she pulled out was stamped with a red eyes only clearance. She had never been this close to such documents. The paper felt different, thicker, like it was made to endure decades of storage. She began to read. The first file described a mission in the late 1980s, a period she vaguely remembered from history class as the tail end of the Cold War. But this wasn't the version she had been taught. It described a covert operation in Eastern Europe, where American operatives had been sent to sabotage communications infrastructure, missions never acknowledged, with casualties listed under training accidents. She recognized none of the names. These weren't the soldiers immortalized in textbooks. They were erased men, their lives reduced to a few lines of classified ink. She turned the page, her stomach twisting. There were photographs, grainy surveillance shots of warehouses, blurred faces in night vision green. One picture showed a group of men boarding a plane that bore no insignia. On the back, someone had scrawled, "Final flight, no return." She dropped the photo back into the folder, her breath uneven. The deeper she dug, the darker it became. Another file outlined Operation Iron Veil, a mission in the Middle East during the early 1990s. Official history described the Gulf War as straightforward, a coalition victory. But here, she read of Black Ops raids carried out in unacknowledged deserts, targeting not just enemy positions, but civilian sites suspected of aiding insurgents. None of it had made the news. None of it would ever make the news. Her hands trembled as she flipped through casualty reports. Names upon names, each marked as non-operational loss. The euphemism was chilling. It meant they had been forgotten deliberately. She leaned back against the cabinet, her head spinning. The whispers of shadows were louder now. These weren't just dusty files. They were pieces of a second history, a world that had always run parallel to the one civilians knew. A hidden United States that bled and killed and buried its own truths. She thought back to the men who had passed through her library, the ones who had come for training manuals or asked polite questions. How many of them were tied to these missions? How many were ghosts walking in daylight, their real stories sealed in these drawers? Her conscience pulled her in two directions. One side screamed that she was trespassing into matters beyond her clearance, beyond her right. The other whispered that these men deserved remembrance, that history couldn't simply erase them. She returned the files carefully, but her eyes caught something on the next shelf, a set of boxes marked with only a single word, denial. The word itself unsettled her. She pulled one of the boxes out and opened it. Inside, she found a stack of documents, printed on old thermal paper, the kind that faded over time. She squinted at the text. These weren't mission reports. They were transcripts of conversations, intercepted calls, coded exchanges between operatives. One line leapt out at her. "If we are caught, they will deny we exist." She read it again, her pulse quickening. The voices in these transcripts spoke of operations in South America, in jungles and border towns, where American presence was not only denied, but officially forbidden. Yet here it was, in black and white. Teens sent under false identities, sometimes abandoned when things went wrong. She closed the folder quickly, bile rising in her throat. The walls felt closer, the silence heavier. For the first time, she asked herself, why was she allowed in here? An access glitch seemed too simple now. The message she'd found, "You're not supposed to stop," echoed with new weight. Someone had wanted her to keep digging. Someone had guided her into this labyrinth of shadows. But who? And to what end? Her mind buzzed with questions, but the files demanded her attention. Another folder revealed photographs from an Arctic site, men in heavy coats standing beside something half buried in the ice. The notes mentioned experimental retrieval and non-terrestrial material. She blinked at the phrase. Non-terrestrial? Her rational mind rejected it immediately. Surely it was a code word, military jargon. But the grainy images of jagged metallic fragments lodged in the ice told her otherwise. She slammed the folder shut, her heart hammering. Every box she opened seemed to peel back another layer of a reality she wasn't prepared to face. Covert wars, hidden deaths, strange recoveries. A world curated carefully for public consumption, while the raw, dangerous truth was locked in these steel drawers. The whispers of shadows had become a roar. When she finally stepped back, her arms ached from holding heavy files. Her eyes burned from reading. She checked her watch and realized she had been in the vault for nearly 3 hours. Time had vanished. She hurriedly returned everything as she had found it, aligning folders, smoothing edges, making sure not a single page was out of place. If anyone checked, she wanted no sign of her presence. As she swiped out and the vault door sealed behind her, she felt both relief and dread. Relief to escape its suffocating silence, dread at the knowledge she carried now. The corridor outside seemed too bright, too normal. Soldiers passed by, laughing, unaware that beneath their feet lay a warehouse of ghosts. That night, she couldn't sleep. The images replayed behind her eyelids. Blurred photographs, redacted pages, names marked as losses no one would mourn. She heard again the phrase, "If we are caught, they will deny we exist." She realized the vault wasn't just a collection of records. It was a graveyard. A place where truth was buried alive, smothered under official silence. And she was now its unwilling caretaker. The whispers wouldn't stop. They followed her into dreams, into waking thoughts. When she walked through the base the next day, every soldier's face seemed doubled, the surface identity and the hidden one that might lie buried in some drawer. She thought about telling someone. A chaplain, maybe. Or a friend. But how could she? To speak even a fragment of what she had read was to put a target on her back. And still, silence felt like betrayal. The next evening, as she locked up the library, she noticed something new. A slip of paper had been slid under her office door. She picked it up, her fingers trembling. 3 words were written in a precise, careful hand. Keep going. Her knees weakened. Someone was watching. Someone knew exactly what she was doing. And worse, they wanted her to continue. The whispers of shadows were no longer just in the vault. They were at her doorstep. By the next week, the base no longer felt like the same place. The once familiar hallways, where she had walked for years without a second thought, now seemed alive with hidden currents. The laughter of soldiers in the cafeteria felt a little too forced, their glances a little too quick. Even the low hum of fluorescent lights in the library sounded accusatory, as if buzzing a warning only she could hear. She could no longer tell if the world had changed, or if it was only her perception that had cracked. But then came the signs she could not dismiss. Her mail was arriving open. Not torn, not mangled, but neatly slid across the top, as if inspected by a careful hand. Her phone calls began to echo faintly, a half-second delay like a ghostly double of her own voice. And one night, when she arrived home, she found her living room window slightly ajar, a window she had locked that morning. She wasn't paranoid anymore. She was being watched. The first time she truly felt it was at the coffee stand outside the base. She stopped there every morning, ordering the same black coffee from the same barista. That day, as she waited in line, a man she had never seen before stood 2 people behind her. Civilian clothes, but the posture of a soldier. He wore sunglasses, though it was still early, his arms crossed, head tilted slightly as if listening. When she glanced back again, he was gone. Her pulse hammered in her ears. She told herself it could be coincidence, but then she began noticing more. A dark sedan parked across from her apartment building at odd hours, the same make and model she'd seen near the base. A figure in a baseball cap sitting in the library after hours, pretending to read a manual upside down. Each sign on its own was harmless. Together, they formed a pattern she could no longer ignore. The vault wasn't just a room anymore. It was a trap she had stepped into, and now the jaws were closing. She tried to act normal. She filed her paperwork. She shelved new shipments of technical manuals. She nodded politely at officers who stopped by, but her hands trembled on the forms. Her smile felt like a mask stretched too thin. And always she felt the eyes. Sometimes she caught a glimpse of them, a reflection in a glass door, a shadow slipping out of view when she turned her head. Other times she simply felt it, a prickle at the back of her neck, an instinct older than reason telling her she was no longer alone. One night, unable to sleep, she sat at her kitchen table with the lights off, staring at the window. Across the street, the dark sedan idled under the same flickering street lamp. She could barely make out the silhouette of the driver. They weren't even trying to hide anymore. She pressed her palms against her eyes, her heart pounding. How had it come to this? She had been a librarian. She had not signed up for covert missions, for secret vaults, for shadow games of surveillance. She had not asked to carry this burden. And yet, she had gone back. Again and again. And someone, whoever they were, had wanted her to. That thought chilled her more than the surveillance. Because if they had wanted to silence her, they could have done it already. If they had wanted her removed, it would have happened the moment she first stepped into the vault. No, someone wanted her to see. Someone wanted her to know. And now, someone wanted to see what she would do next. The realization hit her like a slap. This wasn't just surveillance. It was a test. The next day, she walked into the library determined to watch back. She set her bag down slowly, eyes flicking over the room. 3 soldiers sat at a table, their heads bent over a map. A civilian technician scrolled on a tablet in the corner. None of them looked at her, but she felt it anyway. She began to make small changes to test her theory. She left the library at different times each evening. She took different routes home. She slipped out through side doors instead of the main entrance. Each time, she still found the sedan. Each time, she still felt the eyes. They weren't just watching. They were adapting. Her anxiety grew sharper, but so did her resolve. If this was a test, she would find out who was administering it. She began memorizing faces, writing down license plate numbers, noting patterns. She hid her notes in the spine of an old reference manual no one ever checked out. At night, she sat in darkness with a single lamp, reading over her scribbles. Her handwriting had grown jittery, her letters cramped. But the patterns were emerging. The sedan changed drivers, but never make or model. The man in sunglasses appeared twice in different parts of the base, never interacting with anyone, but always within her sight line. And the slips of paper. She had received 2 now. You're not supposed to stop. Keep going. Each one in the same precise hand, each slid under her door without a sound. She stared at them for hours, trying to decode them. Were they warnings or encouragements? Threats or orders? The vault called to her like a black hole. Part of her wanted to go back, to keep digging until she reached the center of whatever game she had stumbled into. Another part wanted to burn her badge, pack a bag, and vanish. She had begun to dream of running, of empty highways and distant towns where the dark sedan could never find her. But even in her dreams, the vault followed. One evening, she returned home to find her kitchen light on. She had left it off that morning. A glass of water sat on the counter, half full, though she hadn't poured it. Her throat went dry. On the table lay a 3rd note. This one was longer. The handwriting still precise, the paper still unmarked, except for words. It's almost time. She dropped the note as if it were burning. Her mind reeled. Almost time for what? For them to arrest her? For them to recruit her? For her to disappear? The room felt too small, the walls too close. She opened a window just to breathe. Across the street, the sedan was gone. That somehow was worse. She slept little that night. Every creak of the building, every gust of wind outside, felt like a prelude. The next morning, she stared at herself in the mirror, noticing how pale she had become, how sharp her eyes looked. She barely recognized the woman staring back. She wasn't just a librarian anymore. She was a participant in something vast and invisible. As she pinned her badge to her shirt, she realized she had made her choice without saying it aloud. She was going back, not because she wanted to, not because she thought it was safe, but because the vault held the only answers left. If she was being watched, if she was being tested, then she would give them something to watch. She would follow the trail of shadows to its end, even if it led to her own undoing. That evening, as the bass quieted and the sun sank low, she walked the familiar corridor with measured steps. The badge felt heavier than ever in her pocket. She stopped at the vault door, her heart hammering. For a moment, she thought of turning back, of walking out, driving until the desert swallowed her. But she didn't. She swiped the badge. The lock blinked green. And as the door slid open, she felt it. The eyes on her back, the invisible weight of watchers who had been waiting for this moment. She stepped inside anyway. The door sealed shut behind her with a heavy clang, the sound of a trap springing or a curtain rising. For the first time, she didn't feel like an intruder. She felt like a player. And somewhere, in some unseen room, she knew someone was smiling. The vault no longer felt like a room. It felt like a stage. Every time she entered it, she had the strange sense of an unseen audience, of eyes behind walls, of someone holding their breath just beyond the threshold. Tonight was no different. The lights flickered once, then steadied. The temperature inside was colder than she remembered, as though the air conditioning had been turned up deliberately. She moved slowly between the rows of cabinets, fingertips brushing the edges of drawers. Her heart hammered, but not with fear anymore, with a strange electric anticipation. She knew something was coming, and she was right. When she reached the back of the vault, a soft click echoed behind her. She spun around. The door, which always sealed automatically, now hung slightly open. For a second, she thought maybe she hadn't shut it fully. Then a figure stepped inside. He wore no uniform, just a dark suit, immaculate, with a badge clipped at his belt she couldn't read from this distance. He closed the door behind him with a calm, deliberate movement, the heavy sound of the lock sliding home echoing through the steel chamber. "I wondered how long it would take you," he said. His voice was low, even, like a man reading a weather report. She stared at him, throat dry. "Who are you?" "That's not the first question you want to ask," he replied. He stepped closer, his shoes making no sound on the polished floor. "The first question you want to ask is why you're here." She tightened her grip on the file she'd been holding. My badge." He tilted his head, almost amused. "Your badge opened a door. It wasn't supposed to." "Yes, that's what you tell yourself. But you've had plenty of opportunities to walk away. And yet, here you are, again." "I didn't choose this," she said, her voice trembling. "Didn't you?" he asked softly. She blinked at him, a flicker of anger rising through her fear. "I'm a librarian. I didn't sign up for this. I didn't sign up for any of this." "No one ever does," he said. "And yet some people find their way here all the same. The question isn't how you got here. The question is what you're going to do now." He stopped a few feet from her, folding his hands behind his back. "You've read the files. I know you have. You've seen the shadows behind the flag. You know more about this country now than 99% of the people who wear its uniform. That makes you valuable. And dangerous. Her pulse quickened. So what now? You arrest me? Make me disappear? His expression didn't change. If that were the plan, you wouldn't still be standing. The words hung heavy between them. He took a slow step closer. You've been tested, whether you realize it or not. The notes you've received. The access that never closed. The eyes you felt on you. All of it was deliberate. Her stomach turned. You were? Testing me? He nodded once. We needed to know what kind of person you are. Some people run. Some people sell what they find. Some people crumble. But you kept coming back. You kept reading. You even started keeping your own records. Her breath caught. They knew about the notes she'd hidden in the spine of the manual. Of course they did. What do you want from me? She whispered. He studied her for a moment and spoke with quiet gravity. We want to offer you a choice. She felt the vault close in around her. A choice. He held out a small envelope. Inside is a new badge. Higher clearance. With it, you'll have legitimate access to everything you've already seen, and much more. You'll stop being an outsider. You'll stop being a liability. You'll become an asset. Her fingers twitched, but she didn't take it. And if I say no? His eyes met hers, steady and unreadable. Then you'll return your current badge. You'll sign a non-disclosure. You'll be relocated, given a new assignment. And you'll never step foot on this base again. She swallowed hard. And if I tell anyone what I've seen? The faintest trace of a smile ghosted his lips, not unkind but cold. Then I won't be the one you're talking to next. The vault seemed to shrink around her. On one shelf, a file protruded slightly from its drawer. She thought of the photographs she'd seen, the transcripts, the names erased from history. She thought of the sedan outside her window, of the notes under her door, of the night someone had stood in her kitchen. This was it. The moment the whispers had been building toward. Her whole life until now had been about order. Books and files, neat stacks, quiet rooms. Safety and structure. But the vault had stripped that away. It had shown her a world where order was a mask for chaos, where truth was buried under classification stamps. And yet, she couldn't deny the part of her that had wanted to keep reading. The part of her that had felt alive for the first time in years, even as the shadows closed in. You're asking me to become one of you, she said. I'm asking you to decide which world you want to live in, he replied. The one you knew before, or the one you've seen now. She looked at the envelope. The paper was unremarkable, the weight of it invisible. What happens if I say yes? She asked. You'll receive training. You'll be given a cover assignment. You'll do what you've already been doing, reading, cataloging, analyzing. But for us, not for the public. And if I say no? He didn't answer immediately. Then you'll forget everything, one way or another. She flinched. You mean no, he said quickly. We're not butchers. But there are ways to bury a person just as deeply as a file. You'll get a new name, a new life, and this life will vanish. Her head spun. The silence between them stretched. Only the faint hum of the lights filled the air. Finally, she spoke. Why me? Because you opened the door, he said simply. Most people never would have. And because you kept coming back. That tells us something about you. She stared at the envelope again. In her mind flashed the images she'd seen. Soldiers boarding unmarked planes. Folders stamped denial. Names listed under losses that never happened. All of it hidden under the weight of national interest. If she said yes, she would become complicit in that hidden history. If she said no, she would walk away knowing it existed, but powerless to do anything about it. Her fingers brushed the envelope. The paper was cool and smooth. She imagined slipping it into her pocket, walking out, stepping fully into the shadows. She imagined herself at a desk, somewhere far from the library, parsing classified transcripts instead of training manuals. She imagined, for one wild second, what it might feel like to stop being a ghost and start being a player. But she also imagined waking up years from now, her hands stained with secrets, unable to tell a soul what she'd done. Her hand hovered. The man watched her, silent, waiting. Somewhere far above them, the base went about its business. Soldiers drilled. Planes took off. The world spun on, unaware that down here, one woman stood at a crossroads between two Americas. She thought of the first time she'd swiped her badge, and the door had opened. The shock, the thrill, the fear. She thought of the note, "You're not supposed to stop." And the second, "Keep going." And now, here she was, at the edge of whatever lay beyond. She drew a slow, steady breath. And she made her choice. She stood in the vault, envelope in hand, the weight of the choice pressing down like steel. Time seemed suspended, the hum of fluorescent lights the only sound, vibrating against her chest. Outside, the base carried on, soldiers marching, engines roaring, lives continuing as if nothing extraordinary had happened. She could feel the eyes on her, the invisible watchers lingering just beyond walls and doors. The man in the suit waited, expression unreadable. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The silence itself was a verdict. Slowly, she drew a breath. She made her choice. The envelope slid into her pocket. A sudden calm settled over her, the storm of indecision, fear, and adrenaline settling into a sharp focus. Whatever path she had stepped onto, there was no turning back. The vault had drawn her in, shaped her, and now it would define her. The man inclined his head once, almost imperceptibly. "Then welcome," he said. "You already know what this means." She didn't answer. She couldn't. Words would feel inadequate. Instead, she let her eyes wander over the vault, the rows of drawers, the stacks of files and boxes, each containing secrets erased from public memory. Each one a story never told, a mission unrecorded, a life erased. For a moment, she felt the weight of history itself pressing on her shoulders. Not the sanitized version taught in classrooms or shown in films. The raw, hidden reality, the underside of her nation, written in silence and steel. The man gestured toward the shelves. "You'll have access to everything you've already seen, and more. Your role is to organize, analyze, and maintain. You will preserve what history tries to forget. You will make sure it is not lost, even if the world remains unaware." Her hands shook as she ran her fingers over the edges of a file. She thought of the pilot, lost on a mission no one would acknowledge. She thought of the photographs of unmarked planes and foreign territories. She thought of the notes slid under her door. She realized, with a clarity she hadn't felt before, that she wasn't just cataloging files. She was becoming the guardian of truth, dangerous, unacknowledged, and essential. "Do you understand?" he asked, voice low, almost intimate. She nodded, though her mind raced. Yes, she understood. The cost would be her old life, her routines, her safety, her anonymity. But the alternative, to turn away, to forget, to leave others to ignorance, had never truly been a choice. She took a slow step forward, letting the envelope remain in her pocket, the badge in her hand. Her reflection in the steel surfaces around her was unfamiliar. She looked stronger, sharper, yet haunted. She saw the librarian she had been and the archivist of shadows she had become. He studied her silently, then spoke again. "This path isn't easy. You will be watched, but in different ways now. Your actions will have consequences. You may be called to make decisions others cannot even imagine. You may be forced to act when most would hesitate. But if you do this well, you will preserve lives, histories, and truths that no one else can touch. She felt the truth in his words. For the first time, she accepted it. Her ordinary life, quiet, orderly, predictable, was gone. In its place lay a life of vigilance, secrecy, and responsibility, heavier than any library shelf she had ever tended. You will also be tested, he continued. Mistakes are costly. Curiosity can be dangerous. Trust can be weaponized. But your instincts have brought you here. They will serve you well. She absorbed the words quietly, each sentence carved into her awareness. She had crossed the line into another world, one of shadows, secrets, and unseen consequences. When he finally stepped back, she understood. He would leave now, but the vault itself would not be empty. It would wait for her. Every secret, every file, every unacknowledged story would remain, and she would be its custodian. The first task awaited immediately. He gestured to a stack of recently arrived files, marked with a code she hadn't yet learned to interpret. Start there, he said, then turn toward the door. The world outside will never know. Only you will. She nodded, her hands steady now. She opened the first folder. Inside were photographs, satellite images, mission logs, and reports, some only partially declassified, others deliberately redacted. Each sheet represented lives she might never meet, places she would never visit, actions that had been hidden for reasons she might never fully comprehend. Hours passed. She moved with precision, cataloging, annotating, cross-referencing. The hours became days. Every movement was meticulous. She had once counted books and manuals, tracking them in neat order. Now she counted shadows, noting anomalies, inconsistencies, and patterns hidden in the folds of history. She had entered the vault as a librarian, but she was no longer a mere observer. She was a witness, a guardian, a participant in the ongoing story of her nation, the side that existed beyond public scrutiny, beyond applause, beyond the limits of ordinary understanding. Yet, even as she worked, a part of her remained vigilant. She had been watched before. She would be watched again. The eyes that had stalked her in hallways, across streets, and even into her apartment would not vanish. But now she understood their purpose. They were not only monitors. They were guides, keepers of the same secrets she had chosen to guard. At the end of the first week, she paused to look around the vault. The room seemed to hum in quiet approval, the steel walls absorbing her presence as if acknowledging her allegiance. She realized she had stepped fully into a world where ordinary measures of right and wrong were replaced by responsibility, discretion, and endurance. Outside, the base continued to hum with life, oblivious to the unseen stories and hidden histories preserved behind thick steel doors. Inside, she had become part of a different current, one flowing beneath the surface, shaping events without recognition, guarding truths that could never be spoken aloud. And in the quiet moments, when she closed a file or slid a drawer into place, she felt the weight of her new life settle over her shoulders. Heavy, yes, but purposeful, essential. A life that demanded courage, discretion, and constant vigilance. She had chosen her allegiance. Not to glory, not to fame, not to acknowledgement. She had chosen allegiance to truth, to memory, to the shadows that whispered in steel corridors. And though the world outside would never know, she understood that some legacies were meant to be carried in silence. In that silence, she found clarity. The vault held its secrets. She held her own, and together they would endure. The first mission log lay open before her, a reminder that the work had only begun. She adjusted her badge, straightened her spine, and returned her focus to the files. Outside, the world moved on. Inside, history waited, and she would be its keeper. The whispers of shadows would never cease. Neither would she.